All right, well, we're now at the lunch keynote. Dave Hoover is here from Chicago, Illinois. Dave has, author of Apprenticeship Patterns, used to work at Obtiva, Groupon. Now he's doing a lot of really interesting things with Dev Bootcamp in Chicago. So really excited to have him here. Please join me in welcoming Dave Hoover.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this loud enough? Yeah? You're good? Okay. Cool. All right, so kind of an interesting title, Winning at Cooperative Games. First off, I just want to talk a little bit about conferences. This is a little bit off topic, but since you guys are at a conference and eating lunch, I just feel the need to go back in time for me to some of my early conferences. I was 26 when I started programming. Before that, I was at a different career as a therapist. But in 2002, I discovered this thing called extreme programming, which a lot of people in the room I'm sure have heard of and practiced. But there was this conference in Chicago that year called XP Agile Universe 2002. And there's just something so powerful about the right conference at the right time. And that's not going to be true for everybody about this conference today or tomorrow. But for some of you, it will be, and it'll literally change your life. For me that day, or those couple days in the Chicago area, with what was going on right at that point in time with XP and with Agile, it was life-changing. And a few things that happened to me there, which I can only hope would happen, similar things would happen for some of you, were things like there was a code fest, right? So like a code retreat. But this was a code fest where people would come in and out of the room and actually pair and work on a project together so people could kind of get this feeling of this new practice called test-driven development and pair programming that was just becoming popular at the time. And I got to write Ruby code in 2002 with this guy named Roy Miller, who I later, when I went home and kept reading my XP books and stuff, realized he was a co-author of a book. And that just blew my mind. And I had only discovered XP a couple years before that, a few months before that. And so I'd read Kent Beck's White Book, and then I go home and look up the guy that I was pairing with, and it was, like I said, this co-author of another one of those books. And for me, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit of a hero worshiper or something, but that just blew my mind that me, as this self-taught Perl programmer, got to be writing this weird language called Ruby with this co-author. And while we were pairing, these two guys that I kind of knew who they were at this point because they were kind of famous, it was Martin Fowler and Ron Jeffries, were walking around the Code Fest, and I could hear them right behind me looking over our shoulder. And that just, again, just blew my mind. And it kind of lit me up for conferences and the fact that you spend your days doing your job, doing your work, but it's at places like this that you get to connect to some really interesting people and people that are doing remarkable things and are thought leaders. I got to listen that day to Kent Beck at a lunchtime talk, kind of like this, except he was walking around the floor with a mic. And I was really excited for that one because he was the guy that wrote the book that I had just read and had kind of gotten super energized about this XP thing. The cool thing for me as this kind of soft skills therapist entering this hard skills programming world was the talk that he gave that day was about love. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And he talked about the L word, it was this forbidden thing. And I won't say much about the talk other than the fact that this quote that I grabbed that day from him was, he kind of just pushed us all to love, what did he say? Love what you do and love who you work with. And that really resonated for me because first, I switched careers because I loved programming, because I got caught up in this programming kind of feedback loop. And because loving who you worked with seemed like a pretty radical idea, except for the fact that it sounded awesome. And so I'm just trying to share some of my, this one conference highlights for you guys. And then the hard part about the conference was sitting at lunch, actually. I didn't know anybody at the conference. I'd actually paid my own way to be there because my employer just couldn't imagine sending somebody to a conference like that. It was kind of too new, too risky or whatever. But anyway, so I didn't really know anybody there. I wasn't there with anybody from my company. And I had this horrible case of imposter syndrome. Do you guys know what imposter syndrome is? It's that feeling like you're an imposter, right? That's just like in the back of your mind. It's like, oh man, I hope they don't find out that I really don't know what I'm doing. And it's pretty persistent too. Like it keeps going on. Like as you're giving conference talks, you still have that syndrome. Anyway, so I'm sitting at lunch with a group of people that I'd kind of glommed onto a little bit, and they since I was a little bit older, like 26, 27, not old, but that was long ago at this point for me. But they just assumed that I kind of knew a little bit about what I was doing, and in reality, I actually didn't. I'd only been programming for, actually at the time I was like 28, but I'd only been programming for a couple years, and they started bad-mouthing all these like people that had gotten into the software development community during the .com boom, right? And that was me, basically. They called them web monkeys, and I was a web monkey. And that was just, it was terrifying, because I didn't want them to discover that I was actually the person they were describing. And it stuck with me too. I eventually went and got to work at ThoughtWorks a couple years later, and I never let ThoughtWorks know that I knew Perl. It was just like this traumatic thing at this conference where I found out like the general pervasive idea was that XP, Java kind of developers just really looked down on Perl, and it was just going to be my secret, my secret past. So anyway, I tell that in the sense of like these leaders and experienced people at these conferences. This conference can be really powerful in the lives of the inexperienced people. So reach out to the less experienced people around you. Have empathy for them. It's intimidating to be at a place like this. For the inexperienced people in the room, have courage. They're like people who know what they're doing tend to be pretty cool and are really welcoming. I've always been surprised by how welcoming and like I don't know what's the word, open like more experienced people are to helping inexperienced people up. And also just realize like haters are gonna hate. You know, like if there are people that are like kind of like down on beginners or inexperienced people, like that's okay. Just screw those people, right? So anyway, just some thoughts about conferences. But I want to get to the point of some of the stuff I wanted to talk about today, which is kind of a mix of some ideas that have been floating around in my head, and you're eating, you want to just eat some food and maybe get a little bit entertained or something. So I want to get there. So a few things that we're going to talk about, and there'll definitely be like time for Q&A at the end if you guys are interested in talking with me and talking to each other potentially. I want to introduce you to a cool idea from an Agile pioneer. That idea is cooperative gaming, like the kind of cooperative gaming metaphor. How I think about that, a little bit about how I think about that, and then about apprenticeship as a key to kind of winning the game. So that's what we're going to talk about. So here's a quick question for you. See if you maybe read the program or something. But who do you think this is? Does anybody know who that is? You can just shout it out. But you can't say it. Does anybody know who that is? Come on, say it loud. No. All right, cool, awesome. That's awesome. He's the author of these books. Agile Software Development version, or first edition and second edition, also known as the Tiger Book. And next question, how do you pronounce this word? This is his last name. What was that? Coburn. Oh, nice job, Cockburn. So this is good for you guys to know, because it's an awkward last name, and you'll sound awesome and kind of add extra Agile points if you know how to pronounce it correctly. This is like Agile 101. Cockburn. Cockburn, say it with me. Cockburn. Thank you. All right, cool. We'll move on. Alistair Cockburn, he came up with he brought a lot of interesting ideas into software development. He called himself a methodologist. As far as I know, he wasn't like a prolific software developer, but he was a prolific ideas person. And so he imported a lot of ideas into software development. And I'll tweet out a link that kind of is a feed into a bunch of the different ideas that he brought into software development. And just a shout out for interesting, weird, left field sort of ideas. Following those has been really good for my career, just for whatever that's worth. It's always interesting to try to bring outside ideas into this unique thing that we do as like people that work in IT and software development. Okay, so one of the things that resonated for me about Alistair's idea about cooperative gaming is the fact that I love games. I love games so much. Before I was a software developer, before I was a programmer, I loved playing video games. And it was strangely, as soon as I started learning to program, I stopped gaming for like 5 years because I just dove into software development and reading like Alistair's books and a bunch of other books and learning as much as I could. It kind of was had a similar feedback loop for me that video games had. I also like to win. I really like to win. I'm really competitive. Whether it was games or paintballs or football or whatever, I like to win. So I'll get a little excited about the winning part sometimes. So in terms of bringing new ideas in from the outside, we constantly, I don't see it as much recently, or maybe I'm not paying attention as much, but it seems to me like, especially when I got started and I was really like immersing myself in the literature and the blogs and the books that were being published at the time, we were always kind of bringing in metaphors, right, to like help us understand what software development was. And yet it's, in my experience of the last 14 years, it's a pretty unique activity like that humans do. And we try, like I said, to make sense of it by using metaphors. I'm not ready for that slide yet. So people, the easiest thing to kind of relate it to is like house building or building buildings. And that doesn't really work for me for lots of reasons, because that's building something hard, but we're building something soft, hopefully. And what a few of the early Agile pioneers talked about was the fact that software development is more like rock climbing. You tend to do it in pairs, in groups. It's cooperative, and it has a goal. There's an end to the game, right? So the four kind of points, or the four attributes of the kind of cooperative game analogy that Alistair makes is that that software development is cooperative, it's finite, it's goal-seeking, and it's competitive. So it's cooperative internally, like your team is cooperating together to help each other get to the goal. It's finite in the fact that there's an end point. It doesn't just keep going on forever, hopefully. If it does, it'll probably just die at some point. Goal-seeking in the sense that you obviously have a goal that you're trying to get to. And competitive in the sense that like externally, you're probably competing with other teams that you may or may not be aware of. And I'm not an experienced rock climber. I like to climb up things for sure. If you read like my story, it says I like squirrels. Squirrels like to climb things. I like to climb things, but I'm not good at it like the way like an actual like pair or group of rock climbers would be. But anyway, it's still a useful metaphor for me. Let's see what else I wrote down here. Yeah, that's about it. And what I've found over the last 14 years is that people are increasingly at the center of this game. More and more as time goes on, it's not about like your hardware or your tools, other than maybe some tools that greatly increase your people's happiness or productivity. But it's about the people. And there's this second game. There's this like related game to the software development game, which is cooperative, goal-seeking, finite, and then ultimately externally competitive, is this organizational survival game. It's a different game, but it feeds into the software development game. And it's similar in most attributes. It's cooperative. People inside the organization are working together. And yet it's infinite instead of finite. An organizational game is, organizations tend to want to live forever. They want to be immortal, right? Some people like start organizations and say, this is going to live for 100 years. Like, this is going to outlive me. It's goal-seeking, hopefully. The good ones that survive tend to be goal-seeking, having some sort of mission or purpose. And it's more obviously competitive than software development projects, often, where your competitors are more known. But again, competitive, hopefully mostly competitive externally, and mostly cooperative internally. Yeah. So one of the things that went on for me so I read a lot of Alistair's stuff, and half of it sunk in, and half of it fell out of my head because I wasn't ready for it yet. But then I kind of relearned it when I worked at Obtiva, which was this consultancy that we started in the Chicago area in 2006. And I relearned it as one of my coworkers went through the books, and he got immersed in Agile. And one of the things that he picked up was that one of the key things about this cooperative kind of gaming idea, and just about projects and organizations, is it's all about setting yourself up for the next move, right? I'm not a chess player, but I imagine a lot of chess is like obviously positioning yourself for that next move and that winning move or whatever. And that was helpful for me to think about at that moment, because I was a leader at the company, and he was on the leadership team with me, and we were constantly trying to set ourselves up for success, basically. We weren't as much in the trenches of software development projects. We were like helping those software development projects be successful, and mostly getting out of the way. But this was helpful for me. Setting the organizational game is setting software development teams up for the next win, for their next win. And what I've found is that winning organizationally is all about attracting and growing awesome people. It's like amazing how much you can suck at some things, and if you're just good at this, so many things just kind of get taken care of by these awesome people. And one thing I'll note is that I don't think it's about attracting, growing, and retaining awesome people. I think trying to, at least in my experience in the Chicago area, trying to having a retention be a goal isn't necessarily a great idea. The way I've been hiring people at Dev Bootcamp in the last couple years is actually by just explicitly starting the conversation about what they're going to do after they leave Dev Bootcamp. Let's talk about what you're going to do next. How can we help you get there? Which has been which actually feeds into the attraction, and it attracts other people when you're that open about the fact that so many people are not going to stay at the same company for long periods of time, decades at this point. At least not a lot of the people I'm talking to. So anyway, winning organizationally is all about attracting and growing awesome people, in my experience. And most of that experience for me came from this company called Obtiva that existed for about 5 years. That I went and worked for this little company right after I left ThoughtWorks in 2006. And we were in the Chicago area. We started in a small suburb, and just were a couple people. And we took a two-pronged approach to growth, which was based on this. Basically, we knew that we were nobody. Nobody knew our name. We had this awkward name. And even if we had an awesome name, still nobody would really know us very well yet. And so we knew we wouldn't be able to we had goals. We knew where we wanted to go, kind of size-wise and making an impact-wise. But to get there, we knew we couldn't just hire people. We had to also grow people. And so that two-pronged approach was, okay, we're going to hire as many great people as we can, but there's not enough great people to go around. We're probably not going to be able to get all the great people. It's too much competition. So let's also grow people at the same time, okay? We played, and I would say we played the software development game well. We were highly cooperative. We had skilled people. We were highly disciplined, and we kind of put a lot of our reputation on that discipline. We played the organization survival game well, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Because apprenticeship, which is kind of one of the things I've been focused on for most of my career, was that key piece for us, one of the key pieces. Because apprenticeship grows and attracts awesome people who are the players of this game. And when I say attracts, the cool thing about apprenticeship for us was we started an apprenticeship program. It was pretty loose and informal, and so we somehow kind of survived the first year or two without a lot of structure. But once that kind of became more formalized and we started having successes with apprentices and we started talking about it more, it actually attracted more senior people. Because it was a signal to them that we cared, that we were serious, and a lot of good senior people want to mentor, want to help the next generation grow up and do it right, because they're frustrated potentially with watching junior developers get ignored or doing bad work and not getting any mentoring. So it actually became an attractor of talent, which is a good thing. Whoa. So I want to talk. I know this is kind of wandering, but this is my main agenda: is to talk to you guys about apprenticeship. So I want to talk about the ingredients that I've learned in my time with apprenticeship, which has basically been, we started the apprenticeship program in 2007. And we grew it for 4 years until we got acquired by Groupon in 2011, and then we kept it going for a year, and then I left to join Dev Bootcamp. And that story is just about the fact that I'm excited about beginners and wanted to go to where the apprentices were being made, basically. Where do apprentices come from? Well, they come from schools, especially 9-week training programs like Dev Bootcamp. And then, yeah. So anyway, so that's a little bit of my history with apprenticeships. Todd mentioned I wrote a book about apprenticeship, and that book, Apprenticeship Patterns, is available for free online. It's also published by O'Reilly, so you can buy a copy if you want. But that book's for apprentices. It's for the people that graduate from Dev Bootcamp or from CS program, and it's basically career advice. It's packaged as patterns. But these days I'm more focused on how companies can start apprenticeship programs. Okay, because I think that's a key part of winning the organizational game. The apprenticeship programs, to me, are a key part of setting yourself up, setting the organization up for the next winning move, because you're going to continue to have great people available. So I want to walk through relatively quickly the 7 ingredients that I think make up a good apprenticeship program. And I want to say this isn't rocket science. To me, the hard part about apprenticeship programs is not executing them. It's getting your organization to the point where you can actually start. Getting your organization into the sort of mindset that would actually make them want to invest in people, especially in junior people. But let me go through the 7 things ingredients that we've kind of discovered and unearthed over the years. And first off, it's having a mentor, somebody who's willing and excited to work with junior people. That's not everybody, right? And you don't necessarily need all your mid to senior level developers in your organization to be excited about that. But you need one to start, just one. You need a team that's that mentor is probably a part of, who would be willing to incorporate a beginner and sacrifice a little bit of velocity for a little while, for maybe weeks or a month or 2, while this person levels up. And then ultimately, to get this kind of going, you're going to need an owner, a stakeholder, who's willing to invest a little bit of time, a little bit of his or her people's time in making this happen. Second is a sustainable ratio. Some people think apprenticeship and they start thinking about like an episode of Survivor, where it's like 12 people come in and 1 come out, and that's not at all what I'm talking about. A sustainable ratio would be like, what I'm saying here is you would never want to have more beginners than you would like mid to senior level people. You'd never want to go beyond 1-to-1 for the most part. We, like at Obtiva, we struggled with this initially, where we had more senior people in the company, but they were off doing other things, and I was with 3 apprentices, just the 4 of us. And that did not go well. I was excited about apprenticeship, and our first apprentice was amazing, and so we're like, let's do more of this, and quickly we had too many apprentices, and they started getting ignored and started pairing with each other, and there was suffering and sadness. Don't do that. So shoot for 1-to-1 ratio. The other thing I discovered is that the culture of your company and the culture of your team is actually more important than any sort of curriculum that you think you need to create. I've talked to a lot of people over the years about how to create apprenticeship programs, and the first thing they want to do is spend a bunch of time creating this great curriculum and the punch list of things the apprentices are going to learn, which is exciting and fun for some people who get into that. But in reality, you're not necessarily going to know what they need until they get there, right? You know what your tech stack looks like, and they're going to need to get up to speed on that. But a lot of that can be done without a lot of structure. The most important thing is creating a culture that's sensitive to people who don't know what the heck's going on. When somebody throws acronyms around and design pattern names around, it's going to be going right over the apprentice's head, right? And so you want to be focusing on a culture that has empathy for that person, and then someone in the room is going to stop the conversation and be like, do you know what that means? Write that down, We would have lunch and learns. I think a lot of companies have lunch and learns. It's a great practice that kind of gets underappreciated, I guess. And one of the important things at our lunch and learns, very senior people would get up and they'd be practicing conference talks in front of the company, and so there'd be these high-level ideas being thrown around, and it was important for people in the room to stop and ask for definitions and drill down on ideas for the apprentice's sake, because it's difficult and intimidating for them to stop the speaker. So culture over curriculum, and like I said, if someone's excited about creating a curriculum ahead of time, they can probably do it on the fly, when the apprentice gets there based on what they need to know at that moment. I'm a big believer in on-the-fly sort of stuff. In the trenches means apprentices need to learn. This is situated learning, which is a academic term for what apprenticeship is, which is they're learning on real projects with you, pairing with you, or being given tasks that are maybe more menial or something, but in the context of an actual project that's happening. Pretty basic stuff when you think about apprenticeship. At the same time, we found it was really useful to have pet projects, which is basically a project that the apprentice comes up with themselves that they can work on during daylight hours, maybe after hours. But it's something that you can, if you don't have time at that moment, at any given moment, to spend with them on production code, this is something they can work on themselves, a safe place for them to make mistakes and try bleeding edge stuff, which apprentices tend to want. They want to use the new data store or the new language or something, and this is this place where they can try that stuff out and make mistakes, because they don't have many other places at that moment to make mistakes that they need to make. So pet projects were really useful for us. Milestones. So this was a key thing, really simple thing that we introduced, which was we put a time box around an apprenticeship, which was 6 months. We broke that up into 3 chunks of 2 months each, and at every 2-month mark, we would all get together in a room, all being the mentor, the apprentice, and a few other people who would be kind of part of the hiring process potentially, or just some representative group. And we would talk about how it's going. And for me, that was a really key piece, because before we had that, we would just kind of let apprenticeships just kind of go, just kind of drag out. I don't want to fire anybody. It's easy just to kind of just get comfortable. But in reality, we had apprentices that kind of spent too long in the system, and we weren't giving them the feedback they needed. And so the milestones were an opportunity for us to make a decision, which is you're going to continue for another 2 months, you're going to leave, or we're going to hire you right now. That's basically the 3 choices. And for me, like I've always said, that's my opportunity to put on my asshole hat. Because I want to be the nice guy, and like I'm rooting for this apprentice, but at some times along the way at these milestone meetings, I need to be kind of an asshole and make a hard decision, which is really useful for everybody. And those milestone meetings had a lot of pieces to them, which I'll tweet out a link to a paper that goes through a little more detail about that. Most fundamental to that meeting, though, was a retrospective, which kind of goes into the last point, which is that you need feedback loops. And you could actually do all of this, other than maybe, you need a mentor for sure, but you could do this all with a mentor and feedback loops. That's basically how we built, these steps. These ingredients was through feedback loops and just learning what we needed. So feedback loops that start small, which would be like pairing, obviously. Like the apprentice is going to get feedback in the pairing experience. Feedback loops slightly bigger would be like once a week meeting with their mentor for half an hour to just check in about how things are going. Next bigger one would be the milestone meetings, where you'd be retrospecting about what's working well, what's not working well, and what can we do differently for the next 2 months? What could we do to change the apprenticeship program itself based on feedback from the apprentice and the other people in the room? So that's the 7 ingredients that we found at Obtiva to be helpful in creating an apprenticeship program. One other thing that I want to mention is that we're all familiar with the concept of an internship, right? A lot of companies do internships, and so the way a frequent question is, what's the difference between an apprenticeship and an internship? And so the way I think about that is, an internship is like dating, and an apprenticeship is like getting engaged. Okay, and an internship and dating is kind of like, oh, we're going to get together for a little while. It'll be fun. We'll maybe learn some things about each other, and then a couple months later, we'll just go our separate ways. And that was nice, And an apprenticeship is much more focused, and it has a much stronger intention of staying together. About 90% of apprenticeships that I've seen across a bunch of different companies end with employment. There's a ton of investment on both sides. Whereas an internship, it's a lot more freer and a lot freer, and you're not expecting to stay together necessarily. Maybe you'll get back together later in a couple years. But apprenticeships, I just point that out because apprenticeships have a lot of investment. In the intention, it would be exceptional if somebody didn't succeed in this. It's impressive how often people make it through, and then how loyal they are afterwards. One other common kind of worry is, are they just going to leave after the apprenticeship? Like they got these skills, and now they're going to get out of here and go somewhere else. I haven't seen that across, again, multiple different companies. So those are the steps. It's like I said, it's not actually, we didn't find it to be if you have a culture of learning, it's not like a huge investment. It's not super hard. It takes a certain amount of discipline. So I would say apprenticeship, and one of my job at Dev Bootcamp, one of my jobs at Dev Bootcamp is pushing apprenticeship and talking to companies about how to get started with it. So I'd love to talk to anybody in the room if you're interested in learning more about it. But a lot of the work, once we get them to the point where they want to do it, we don't really need to be that involved because they know what they need. They know what needs to be learned in order to kind of be productive in their situation. And it's not like rocket science. But it is hard to get a culture and a company and an organization to that point where they're ready to make that move and invest. And all right, just the mind shift about how do we take in people who are about 6 months more junior than we currently hire, right? Or whatever, however many months it is for you. So yeah, and it requires, so what I've seen in the last couple of years, especially since I've been focused at Dev Bootcamp, which is a San Francisco-based company that now has locations in Chicago and New York. And I run our Chicago operation, and so we've graduated a couple hundred students at this point. And it's so interesting to see. I'm discovering that there's apprenticeship programs in Chicago that I never knew existed because they're hiring our students as apprentices. And it's interesting that I don't see that same kind of uptick in apprenticeships in the Bay Area. And what my take on that at this point is that, for better or for worse, the Bay Area has they're very focused on the short term, right? They've had a ton of success. They've had all these billionaires be created really, really quickly. And so that tends to put people in a short-term focus. Like they're almost like flipping houses, the way they flip these companies, which is a really difficult mentality. It doesn't really jibe super well with apprenticeship, which is a long-term decision, like a multi-year kind of investment in a person. And I just want to mention that because that's another like kind of resistance point to this sort of thinking. But that's also why an apprenticeship program is a great signal to people that want kind of a stable, good job, right? A good gig, is that if you have an apprenticeship program, like you're signaling to the people, to the junior people and the senior people that like we're going to be around. We're not just here to like make a quick buck and get out and exit. So anyway, something else I've learned along the way that I wanted to mention. So that's what I have. I'd love to answer any questions you guys have, or just talk over here if you want to talk about stuff. But yeah, thank you for listening, and hope you enjoyed your lunch. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
So are you trying to define milestones ahead of time and saying are you thinking ahead of time of things you want to work on or what you get to?
Yeah, good question. So the question was thinking about feedback loops and milestones, and are we kind of prescribing what the milestones are? The milestones are more time-based. Milestones are not like you're going to learn X, Y, this checklist of things before this date, or you're going to ship some certain part of your pet project by a certain date. What the milestone is more of like, where are you right now? Let's do a code review of your pet project. Let's get an update about how things are going, like on your like production projects you're working on with your team. And in general, by the first milestone for us, which was 2 months, they should be pretty integrated and like becoming pretty productive as a team member. That's probably the only real expectation, is like by that first milestone, if they're not like starting to add velocity as opposed to subtract velocity, that there's probably, there's something needs to be done, and we need to give them a little bit of feedback and warning about like, we really need to see you make a lot more progress in the next 2 months, otherwise we're going to have to ask you to leave. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. When does an apprenticeship end? Yeah, so we have a time box around that too. Like at 2 of the milestone meetings, it's like, are we letting you go right now? Are we hiring you right now? Or are we continuing? But we had a time box, like, so basically like, it's 6 months. If you're not kind of where we need you to be within 6 months, then we're gonna have to ask you to leave. For us, that we never got to the very end and we're like, oh, sorry, it didn't work out. We always knew within like the first 1 or 2 milestones whether it was gonna work out. And if in the 2 cases that it didn't work out, we let them go at the 4-month mark. So yeah, that having that 6-month kind of time box helps you find and helps you know like who's ready, I guess you could say. Like if it's always, if you let it be like really variable, then it's hard to figure out like who's a good candidate. But like after you've hired a few people, kind of 6 months prior to entry level, you kind of get a feel for it. Any other questions about anything?
Can you describe the skills of a typical person that starts out in the Dev Bootcamp?
Sure. So the skills of the typical person that starts at Dev Bootcamp. So it's I guess one thing to say about that is like the word start. Like at what point in the process. So when they apply, most people have very little skills. They've like probably taken like a MOOC, like a massive open online course, where 100,000 people take the like MIT algorithms course or something, or they've used codecademy.com, or they've like the cool thing that makes Dev Bootcamp kind of possible right now is it's so easy to get become a dabbler. It's like it's easier than ever, right? And I'm sure I'll be able to say the same thing in 5 years. It's easier than ever to become like a dabbler software developer, and that's basically what they are. They're dabblers when they apply, and then between the time they apply and when they get accepted, we try to scare them off by often trying to give them some different work to do. If we don't feel like they know what they're getting themselves into, we give them a tutorial to go do, and then come back when you finish. And so that's a good filter for because we don't want people come and show up and then 2 days later leave because it's too intense. And oh my gosh, this coding thing actually isn't that interesting to me. And then we actually have a 9-week program that they go through remotely before they get to us, where we have online, people online, coming into Google Hangouts with them and a pair from their cohort after hours. This is before they've quit their job and stuff. So they do a 9-week program, about 10 to 20 hours a week from home. And that gets them to the point where when they walk into Dev Bootcamp on day 1, we're not teaching them about local variables and methods and things like that. We're pushing them pretty hard into pretty advanced Ruby topics in the first week. And at the end of the week, they have to create a Sudoku solver, basically, if that kind of sets the tone. It's a hard project for them. They do it in groups, but that's where they're at the end of week 1 is go solve. If we give you an input of a starting Sudoku board, solve it. So does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Other questions? Yeah. Did we purchase what? Oh, no, we tend to, we have our own curriculum that they go through during the prep phase, but the stuff that we send them to generally in the interview application stuff phase is stuff that's out there. There's so much great stuff out there. So it's awesome, and it's always changing. How do we choose it? Yeah, I mean, just by exposing, just by recommendations and reading it ourselves and just doing some research. But I mean, we're a big enough company now with 20 plus teachers and kind of technical educators that we tend to know. We're connected to the community, so we kind of know what's new and useful out there. So it's evolving. It evolves pretty quickly. Other questions?
Dave, I have one.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the balance between putting apprentices in an environment that's in the trenches compared with giving them an environment that's okay to fail?
Yeah.
And kind of maybe how that balance shifts, I guess, as you go through apprenticeship?
It's like a kind of careful dialing up over the course of the first 2 months or so. Where you're going from, all right, this person's probably kind of dangerous as a software developer when they first get there. Some are more advanced than others. We're not necessarily hiring people right off the street, right? That's why I went to Dev Bootcamp, because Dev Bootcamp graduates they're not necessarily ultra productive yet, but they're not dangerous for the most part. But maybe a little bit. In the wrong context, in a certain context, they would be. Yeah, so for us, it was just getting them, they'd kind of start out shadowing more, and then in each day, each week, they'd just become more integrated into the team, where, like I said, it tended to be just this slow progression where on day 0, they're shadowing, and by day 60, they're pairing and writing tests and being useful. So, yeah, I guess it's about just the person. It's basically about the people responsible for the work need to make that call about and make the call about whether this person's ready or not. And you would tend to do it by giving them tasks to do and seeing how they do on them. Hopefully non-critical tasks, and just gaining trust. That's a lot of what it is the apprentice gaining the trust of the people around them. Does Does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. It's a slow thing, and it's really up to the people on the project because they're responsible for delivering something, useful and delivering the value, and they obviously can't let the apprentice get in the way of that. And so for us as a consulting company, our apprentices would always kind of be in our studio, not out at client sites and stuff, with the teams that were in the studio. And the clients might not even know they existed at first because they weren't even committing anything. They were just observing and watching. And then we wouldn't charge them for their time at first, right? We would explain to them, oh, we have this apprenticeship program, and this person's going to be kind of learning on the project. We won't charge you for their time, and they'll actually be delivering value soon. And so, yeah. And then at some point you start feeling like, all right, well they're delivering enough value that we should start charging for their time. Some fraction of their time should be billed to the client. So that was just kind of how it ramped up each time. Any other questions? Cool. I think that's it. All right. Thanks for listening. I'll be over here.